It was the kind of dinner you could smell money in. The vintage wine, the polished silverware, the chandelier that looked like it cost more than my first home. I sat at the long dining table in the Kingsleys' estate on Hilton Head Island, flanked by portraits of dead relatives I'd never met and antique cabinets no one dared to touch. Nate, my husband of 2 years, was unusually quiet, but his eyes sparkled with anticipation. His mother, Elaine, wore her usual tight-lipped smile, the kind that felt more like a threat than a welcome. Charles, his father, looked at me the way a banker might assess a portfolio, calculated, detached, already making decisions without you. We'd barely finished our starters when Charles reached beneath the table and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it toward me like it was a birthday card, not a legal document that could alter my entire future. Elaine leaned in, her voice sweet as syrup. "We've been thinking about the future, Samantha. About legacy, about family unity." Nate reached for my hand, gave it a gentle squeeze. "You trust me, babe, right?" he asked, smiling like he was asking for a dance, not my signature on a contract that would hand over everything I owned. I opened the envelope. The words on the first page hit me like a slap. It was a trust agreement, no, a takeover. They wanted every asset in my name. Real estate, savings accounts, even my emergency fund. All of it consolidated into one family, trust managed solely by the Kingsleys. I wouldn't have access to a dime unless the three of them, Nate, Charles, and Elaine, agreed. My gut twisted, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I folded the first page back calmly and looked at Nate. "You really think I'd just hand it all over?" I asked, voice light, almost amused. Nate laughed gently, still holding my hand. "It's just a formality, Sam. It's for protection for us. We're building a future together." I stared at him, at the man I once believed was my partner, and I realized in that moment that he was nothing more than a well-dressed stranger in my home. I placed the papers back on the table, neatly, like I wasn't one breath away from setting them on fire. Then I smiled, the kind of smile I save for closings that go exactly as I planned. "Well," I said softly, "if you trust me, you'll love what I have in my safe deposit box." The room froze. Nate blinked. Elaine stiffened in her seat. Charles narrowed his eyes. "What's in the box?" Nate asked, his voice suddenly brittle. "Just some paperwork," I replied casually. "Something I had prepared before we got married. For protection." My tone mirrored his from seconds ago. Then came the knock on the door. Soft, deliberate. Charles nodded toward the butler, who disappeared for a moment and returned, holding the door open for someone none of them expected. My lawyer, Harper Ellis, walked in, heels clicking on the marble floor, her briefcase gleaming like armor in a courtroom. "Good evening," she said, placing the case on the table beside the untouched bread rolls. "I'm told there's a contract my client is supposed to review." Elaine's face lost its color. Nate let go of my hand. Charles said nothing, just leaned back, arms folded, as if the room had turned into a chessboard and I'd moved first, check. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. Harper was already flipping through the contract, scanning each clause with surgical precision. "Wow," she murmured after a moment. "This is blatant financial coercion, almost elegant in its boldness." She looked up and met Charles's eyes. "If Samantha had signed this, you'd have complete control of her assets. She wouldn't even be able to pay a phone bill without your approval." Elaine reached for her wine glass, her fingers shaking, and I just sat there, still smiling, because finally they were starting to understand. I wasn't the girl they could push around. 6 years earlier, I would have laughed at the idea that I'd end up here, surrounded by mahogany and malice, battling my own husband over the empire I built. Back then, I was 28, living in Savannah, and too busy flipping houses and reviewing zoning permits to care much about anything else. Real estate was my language, my identity. I'd learned early on that no one was going to hand me anything, so I stopped asking and started taking. Then I met Nathaniel Kingsley at a fundraising gala hosted by the Chamber of Commerce. He was tall, tailored, and carried himself like someone who had never waited in line. We ended up sharing a cocktail table and arguing over property tax loopholes. He was clever, well-read, and had the kind of confidence that made you lean in just to keep up. But what struck me wasn't what he said, it was what he didn't. He never mentioned work, never elaborated on how he paid for the Aston Martin he arrived in or the Mont Blanc watch he wore. He just said, "I help with family investments," and let the silence do the rest. I should have asked more questions. But when someone treats you like you're the rarest woman in the room, it's easy to mistake that for love. Our courtship was fast. Lavish dinners, weekend getaways, spontaneous flowers delivered to my job. My friends were skeptical, especially Harper. Yes, the same Harper who would later save me. She once said, "He looks like someone who thinks prenups are offensive." I laughed. I was still foolish enough to believe love didn't need paperwork. So I kept my finances separate, but my heart I gave without a receipt. Meeting his parents was my first taste of something sour. Charles Kingsley was a retired attorney who spoke in citations and clauses, and Elaine was all silk scarves and subtle digs. "You've done well for yourself, Samantha," she told me that first dinner. It must be so empowering to come from so little. Nate smoothed over the tension with jokes and wine. But even then, something about them felt off. Like they were constantly sizing me up, my earnings, my clothes, even the way I cut my steak. I convinced myself it was just old money arrogance, that they'd warm up once they saw how much I cared for their son. But they didn't. They only grew more polite, more performative. Like actors in a play they assumed I didn't understand. Over time, Nate began borrowing money here and there. Just a few hundred at first. "Card's acting up," he'd say. "I'll Venmo you later." He rarely did. Then came the tax season. He wanted to optimize by buying a property in my name. "It's just better for deductions," he claimed. I shut that down gently. But I started to wonder, was this love or a long game? Still I stayed. Because he made me laugh. Because I was tired. Because sometimes being with someone feels easier than starting over, even when your instincts whisper otherwise. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony in Charleston. I wore a champagne-colored gown. Elaine wore white. Harper raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I remember that detail because it was the moment I felt my first real chill. Like something invisible had slipped into the room and taken a seat among the guests. I didn't know then that the chill would return years later at a dinner table. Only this time I'd be ready for it. Harper's voice sliced through the room with a calm so sharp it bordered on menace. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. The words did all the cutting. "If Samantha had signed this document," she said, flipping to the 3rd page, "she would have relinquished control of every account, every deed, every investment in her name. The trust gives full authority to 3 trustees, you, Charles, Elaine, and your son Nathaniel, while my client is granted ceremonial access, meaning no decisions, no signatures, no freedom." Elaine let out a brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous. It's just standard estate planning. Every family does this." Harper didn't blink. "Not every family sets up a trust where one member has all the risk and none of the power. That's not planning, it's predatory." Nate shifted uncomfortably in his seat, tugging at his collar. Charles leaned forward, voice low and clipped. "Let's not dramatize this. We're talking about trust, about building a future together." Harper glanced at me, then back to him. "Interesting you bring up trust, Charles. Because based on this clause here," she tapped the page, "you could liquidate Samantha's assets tomorrow, move the funds to an offshore account, and she'd have no legal recourse. That's not a future. That's theft wrapped in ribbon." The air grew thick, like all the oxygen had been replaced by something heavier. Then Elaine leaned back, placed a hand delicately on her chest, and said in a syrupy voice, "So I suppose this means you're not interested in the Rhode Island estate." My head snapped toward her. "What estate?" Nate's eyes widened, just for a split second, but it was enough. Elaine smiled as if she'd been waiting to drop this little grenade. Oh, dear. Did Nathaniel never tell you about his grandfather's estate in Newport? The Kingsley legacy. She sighed, theatrical. It's currently in probate, of course, but once finalized, it will return to the rightful bloodline. Naturally, the trustees must meet certain marital conditions. My stomach turned, not from surprise, but from the clarity that suddenly hit me like a freight train. This wasn't about protection. It was never about unity. They didn't just want my money, they needed me. Legally. Because the estate required Nate to be married to someone of stable financial standing, someone with assets of her own, someone like me. I looked at Nate. Were you ever going to tell me? He rubbed his temples, trying to muster that polished charm he'd always leaned on. I wanted to when the time was right. The time was right. I repeated, my voice like ice. When exactly? Before or after I signed away my life? He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. He never intended to tell me. Not unless it benefited him. Harper's eyes met mine, and I saw it there, recognition. We were thinking the same thing. If they were willing to go this far to lock me into a financial prison, what else were they hiding? Charles cleared his throat again. This has become unnecessary, he said stiffly. Let's proceed like adults. I almost laughed. Adults, I said, rising slowly from my chair. You mean the kind that ambush a family member over dinner and try to bully her into signing away her life savings? That kind. Elaine looked away, her lips trembling. Nate reached for my arm, but I stepped back. Don't, I warned. And that's when Elaine said something that made my skin crawl. If you walk away from this, you're walking away from everything. The family, the future, the inheritance. She said it not like a threat, but like a promise she was used to people believing. I stared at her for a long, cold moment before I replied. Then maybe it's time someone reminded you. Not everyone's afraid of losing a last name. And with that, I turned and walked out. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling of my quiet Savannah home, trying to figure out how long it had been since I stopped recognizing the man I married. The puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place, and they painted a picture I hadn't wanted to see. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called Harper. I want everything, I told her. Every loan, every account, every signature. I want to know what he's hiding. She didn't ask why. She just said, I'll get my investigator. 2 days later, I was sitting across from Harper in her office as she slid a thick file across the desk. I didn't even have to open it. The look on her face told me everything. But I did anyway. Credit card debt, business loans, personal loans, a second mortgage, and one loan in particular stood out. It was in my name, taken out 3 months ago, forged signature. My pulse spiked. How long has he been stealing from me? I whispered. Longer than you think, Harper replied. And that's not all. She pulled out 2 photos and set them down side by side. 2 women, both beautiful, both younger than me. The one on the left is Simone, she said. He promised her an engagement 2 years ago, took out a loan in her name, cleaned out her savings, then disappeared. I swallowed hard. And the other? Madeline Rivers, Harper said, her tone darkening. Current fiancé. They're planning a wedding in 6 weeks. The room tilted for a second. He's engaged. My voice cracked. While still married to me? Harper nodded. She doesn't know. Yet. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the 2 rings in the photo. Mine and hers. Identical designs. Same jeweler. He didn't even bother to be creative. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Rage, betrayal, disbelief, but most of all, clarity. This wasn't just a personal attack. This was a pattern, a career. Nate Kingsley didn't love women, he targeted them. And I was about to become the last one who ever let him get away with it. I need to speak to her, I said. Harper agreed. She arranged a quiet meeting at a riverside cafe in Charleston the following afternoon. Madeline arrived on time, radiant and beaming with excitement. She thought we were going to talk event planning, her engagement, her upcoming future with the man of her dreams. I waited until her latte was halfway done before I said his name. Madeline, I began carefully, this is about Nathaniel Kingsley. The moment I said it, her smile faltered. Do you know him? I reached into my bag and laid my wedding band on the table. I'm his wife. She stared at it, frozen. Then, like a slow avalanche, her world began to collapse. No, she whispered. That's not possible. I'm afraid it is, I said gently. Her hands trembled as she reached into her own purse and pulled out a ring, an exact copy of mine. She placed it beside mine on the table. Twins. I watched her as the tears came, thick, silent sobs that broke something in both of us. He told me we'd moved to Europe, that he was coming into an inheritance and wanted to start a new life. I clenched my fists. He's using you the same way he tried to use me. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. I gave him everything. I emptied my savings for the down payment on our venue. I leaned in. Are you still in contact with him? He's taking me to meet his parents this weekend. My eyes narrowed. Perfect. Let's crash the dinner. The Kingsleys had prepared everything. The wine was decanted. The table was set with bone china and embroidered napkins. The chandelier above the dining room shimmered like they were about to crown royalty. They thought it would be a celebration, a coronation of their newest pawn, Madeline Rivers. The next woman they'd drain dry. What they got was war. I arrived first. Elaine's smile faded the second she saw me at the door. What are you doing here? She hissed. I stepped inside calmly, removing my gloves like I had all the time in the world. You really think I'd miss a family affair? Before she could answer, the front door opened again. Madeline stepped in, dressed like the glowing bride-to-be, and she wasn't alone. Harper followed close behind, her briefcase in hand like a loaded weapon. Nate entered from the hallway just in time to see both of us, me and Madeline, standing side by side. His face drained of color. Babe, he stammered, looking at Madeline. Why is she here? Madeline crossed her arms. You tell me. There was a long pause. You could feel the tension tighten around the room like a vice. Charles stood slowly from his seat. This is absurd. I will not have this spectacle at my dinner table. I looked at Harper, who nodded. Oh, I think you should pay attention, I said sweetly. Because what's coming next? You'll want to be sitting down. Harper stepped forward, opening her folder. Let's begin with the fraud, she said calmly. Then we'll get to the matter of bigamy. Elaine gasped like someone had thrown cold water in her face. Charles slammed his glass down, wine splashing across the tablecloth. Nate didn't say a word. His eyes were locked on me, filled with hatred and fear. Madeline didn't hesitate. She took off her engagement ring and hurled it at Nate's chest. You lied to me, she said, voice trembling. You were married this whole time. You told me we were starting a life together. Nate opened his mouth. Save it, I cut in. She's not the only one you conned. You took out loans in my name, forged my signature, tried to steal my assets. And all for what? To buy yourself a few more months before your entire family's debt collapsed. Charles stiffened. What debt? He demanded. Harper smiled faintly. You didn't know. Your assets are frozen. Probate court has been alerted about the inconsistencies in your filings. Turns out, trying to pressure someone into merging their wealth with yours while your estate is under investigation? Not smart. Elaine's knees buckled. She collapsed into the nearest chair. No, this can't be. Oh, but it is, Harper said, clicking her pen. Every account, every loan, every false document. It's all in here. Nate finally snapped. You think you've won, he spat, voice sharp. You think this makes you better than us? You've always loved holding it over me, making me crawl to you for money. I stared at him, calm. Funny. I thought I was protecting myself from a man who never earned my trust. His voice rose. I was your husband. You were supposed to support me, not betray me like this. You betrayed yourself, I said coldly. I just exposed the truth. Charles turned to Nate, his voice hard. Sit down. Nate looked like he might explode, but he obeyed. Harper continued. Samantha has already filed a criminal complaint. Fraud, identity theft, forgery. And as for Madeline, she turned. Would you like to speak? Madeline's voice was steady now. I've reported the money he took from me, and I've rescinded my engagement. He can explain his way out of that from behind bars. Elaine shrieked. You set us up. Her voice cracked. You ruined us. I met her gaze without flinching. No, Elaine, you ruined yourselves. I just pulled the curtain back. And right on cue, sirens rang outside. The sound of the sirens wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate. A slow, descending wail that felt more like a verdict than a rescue. I watched through the front window of the Kingsleys' estate as two officers stepped out of their car and made their way to the front door. Nate bolted upright. You called the police, he hissed, eyes wide with disbelief. I warned you, I said softly. You thought I wouldn't go through with it? Watch me. Harper opened the door without hesitation, handing over the documentation we'd compiled. Bank statements, forged contracts, the list of charges. The officers asked for Nathaniel Kingsley. He didn't resist, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew everything was already gone. They cuffed him in front of his mother. Elaine cried out, stumbling toward him. No, this is a mistake. You can't take him. We're family. One of the officers replied without looking at her. Ma'am, your son is being arrested on multiple felony counts. You might want to contact a lawyer. Charles sat frozen, staring at the table as if it were suddenly unfamiliar. His hands shook slightly, barely noticeable, but I caught it. The realization had landed, and it wasn't going anywhere. Nate was escorted out in silence. And just like that, the Kingsley empire cracked. In the following weeks, the fallout was swift and brutal. The Rhode Island estate blocked from distribution. Probate court ruled that Charles and Elaine had misrepresented the family's financial state. Their accounts were audited. Back taxes surfaced. Hidden debt revealed. Within 2 months, their lavish Hilton Head estate was listed for foreclosure. Elaine was seen leaving the property with 2 suitcases and a dog crate. No driver, no staff, no silk scarves, just a woman who had spent decades looking down on others, now completely invisible. Charles resigned from every remaining board seat he held. His name was quietly scrubbed from the country club membership rolls. Reputation doesn't survive scandal when you're no longer rich enough to make it disappear. As for Nate, he was denied bail. The combination of identity theft, financial fraud, and bigamy made the court label him a high-risk defendant. Harper said he'd likely serve a minimum of 7 to 10 years. And with everything they uncovered, possibly more. Madeline and I met again 1 week later, this time at a quiet rooftop bar in Savannah. No lawyers, no confrontation, just 2 women who had survived the same storm and walked out stronger on the other side. We clinked glasses, her rose, my bourbon. To closure, she said. I smiled. To never being fooled again. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. There was an understanding between us, an invisible thread of shared damage and reclaimed power. We weren't victims. We were witnesses, architects of justice. And me? I kept building. Not houses this time, but something quieter, safer. A life with no secrets, no signatures in the dark, no masks at the dinner table. Just me, my work, and the knowledge that I never again had to explain why I didn't trust easily. Because now I had proof that sometimes the people who say, trust me the loudest, are the ones you need to watch the closest. And when they come for what's yours, let them find out too late you were always ready. It took me weeks to feel safe in my own skin again. Not safe from danger. I had already won that battle, but safe from the silence, the quiet after the storm, the kind that echoes every should have known. And why did I stay so long, louder than any courtroom verdict? I spent most of those days walking, just walking, through the historic streets of Savannah, past the homes I'd helped restore, the alleyways where I used to dream with spreadsheets and paint samples in my bag. I found myself standing outside an old townhouse on Whitaker Street. It was the first house I ever flipped. I remembered the chipped blue shutters, the creaking porch swing, the stubborn staircase that had taken me a week to repair with borrowed tools and blistered hands. That house had taught me how to build, and more importantly, how to rebuild. I didn't knock. I didn't need to go inside. Just seeing it again was enough. A reminder that long before Nate, long before his lies and that contract and the cold polished tables of his parents' world, I had already created something from nothing. I didn't need permission then. I wouldn't ask for it now. Some nights, I'd sit out on my front porch with a cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, just silence and peace, the kind that doesn't come from revenge, but from knowing you stopped the cycle, that it ends with you. Harper called me a few weeks later. Media got hold of the case, she said. Local news, some legal blogs, even a finance podcast. I didn't flinch. Let them talk. She paused. Do you regret any of it? I smiled. Not a thing. Except, maybe, not seeing it sooner. There's this lie we're told as women, especially older women, that loving someone means losing a part of yourself. That compromise is noble even when it bleeds you dry. That silence is grace. That patience will pay off. It doesn't. What pays off is knowing your worth before someone tries to price tag it for you. What pays off is having a lawyer who believes in the power of a woman who plans ahead. What pays off is keeping your name on your own house, your own accounts, your own peace. One morning, while flipping through old photos in the attic, I found a picture of me, hair tied back, holding a hammer, standing in front of that first townhouse in Whitaker Street. I was younger, freckled, sunburned, exhausted, and smiling like someone who hadn't been betrayed yet, but who would survive it when it came. I framed it, set it by the window, where the morning sun hits around 8:45. It reminds me who I am, who I was before I was anyone's wife, before I was someone's target. Now, when people ask me if I believe in revenge, I just say this: I believe in truth. And if that ruins the wrong people, so be it.